Some kingdoms are built of stone and ambition. Others are forged in gold and conquest. But the island kingdom of Solara was woven from sunlight and sea salt, a small, forgotten paradise on the edge of the empire. For centuries, its people had lived by the rhythm of the tides, their wealth not in coin, but in the bounty of the sea and the richness of their soil. But the tides had turned, the rains had stopped, and the sea, once their provider, had become their prison. Cutthroats and petty warlords, smelling the weakness like sharks to blood, had descended upon their shipping lanes, strangling their trade, bleeding them dry. Solara was dying, and a dying kingdom attracts desperate gods. In the governor's mansion, a relic of a more prosperous time, Governor Alastair prayed for a savior. What answered was a devil. He arrived not on a warship bristling with cannons, but on a ghost. The Silent Tide, the flagship of the pirate king Kaelen, was a vessel spoken of in terrified whispers in every port across the known world. It moved without sound, its black sails drinking the moonlight, appearing and disappearing as if it were a figment of a nightmare. And its captain, known only as the Wraith, was a man more myth than flesh. He didn't raid for treasure, he collected power. He didn't burn cities, he absorbed them into his shadowy empire. His price for salvation was always steep and always paid in something far more precious than gold. The meeting took place in the governor's study, a room heavy with the scent of old leather and desperation. Kaelen was not what Alastair had expected. He was not a scarred, bellowing brute. He was tall, lithe, and moved with a predatory grace. His face was a mask of cold, handsome neutrality, his eyes the color of a frozen sea, missing nothing. He listened to the governor's plea in absolute silence, his stillness more intimidating than any threat. He heard of the famine, the pirates, the slow death of their people. When the governor finished, his voice cracking with emotion, Kaelen made his offer. It was simple. He would shatter the blockade. He would hang every pirate bleeding Solara dry. His flag would fly over their port, granting them his absolute protection. The island would flourish again. "And your price?" the governor asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Your price," Kaelen corrected, his gaze shifting to a portrait above the fireplace, a portrait of his daughter, Seraphina, "is a marriage, an alliance, sealed with blood. I require a queen to solidify my claim on these waters, and a wife to provide me with an heir." The governor recoiled as if struck. His daughter, his Seraphina, the one pure thing left in his world. He began to refuse, to rage, but a soft voice from the shadows of the doorway stopped him. "I accept." Seraphina stepped into the light. She had been listening. She had heard the desperation in her father's voice and seen the cold logic in the pirate's offer. She wore a simple white dress, but she stood with the posture of a queen, her chin held high, her eyes the same stormy gray as the pirate king's, blazing with a fire he did not expect. She was beautiful, but it was a severe, intelligent beauty, a beauty that looked back, unafraid. She walked until she stood directly before Kaelen, forcing him to meet her gaze. "I will be your wife, Pirate King," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I will be the price for my people's survival. But know this, you will be marrying a governor's daughter, not a slave. You will have my hand, you will not have my soul." A flicker of something, surprise, amusement, passed through his frozen eyes. He looked from her to her father, a silent dismissal. The deal was no longer with the old man, it was with her. "The soul is of no interest to me," he said, his voice a low murmur. "The contract is for your hand and your obedience. The rest is irrelevant." The wedding was a phantom affair, held on the deck of the Silent Tide as it lay anchored in the Bay of Solara. Seraphina wore a gown of borrowed pearls and silk, a stark white figure against the dark, menacing wood of the pirate ship. Kaelen stood beside her, a shadow in black leather. The crew, a collection of silent, disciplined killers, watched with unreadable expressions. There was no joy, no celebration. It was a transaction, a sealing of a deed. As the sun bled into the horizon, they were pronounced man and wife. And as her father wept on the shore, Seraphina turned her back on her old life and stepped into her new cage. She was escorted to the captain's quarters, a sprawling cabin that was a world unto itself. It was a museum of a dead world filled with artifacts from a dozen conquered cultures, books bound in strange leathers, and maps of seas she had never heard of. But for all its opulence, it felt cold, lifeless. It felt not like a home, but a tomb. She waited. For hours she waited, every nerve in her body screaming. She was now the property of this man, this wraith. She had prepared herself for the inevitable brutality, the consummation of this monstrous bargain. When he finally entered, the dying light of the twin moons cast long shadows across the room. He said nothing, merely unbuckling the heavy leather belts from his waist, the sound echoing in the silence. He walked toward the massive four-poster bed that dominated the room. Her breath hitched. She braced herself, her hands clenching into fists at her sides, the only rebellion she had left. He stopped before her, so close she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. "Your debt the father incurred is a great one, and the price of my protection is absolute." He leaned in closer, his breath warm against her ear. "Your debt is paid in my bed." A tear of pure, hot despair escaped her eye and traced a path down her cheek. This was it, the sacrifice. She closed her eyes, preparing for the violation, for the end of who she was. She heard him move, felt the bed dip beside her. She flinched, waiting for his touch, but it never came. After a long moment, she dared to open her eyes. He was not beside her. He was standing by the bed, looking down at her, his expression unreadable. He gestured to the vast expanse of the silk sheets. He commanded her, "Sleep," his voice flat, devoid of any passion. Confused, she watched as he walked to the far corner of the room, where a single, high-backed chair sat in deep shadow. He sat down, the leather creaking under his weight, and he did not move. He simply sat there, a sentinel in the darkness, his gaze fixed upon her. She lay down on the bed, her mind reeling. What game was this? What new form of torture had he devised? Was he testing her, waiting for her to show weakness? She lay stiffly, pretending to be asleep, every fiber of her being aware of him, of his silent, unblinking observation. Hours passed. The moons outside traced their arcs across the sky, and he did not move. He just watched her sleep. All night long, the feared pirate king, her husband, her owner, did nothing but watch her sleep, like a guardian protecting a sacred grave. And Seraphina, lying in the cold, opulent bed, realized her fate was not to be a pirate's whore. It was to be something far stranger and infinitely more terrifying. She was the Ghost King's living ghost.
The first dawn of her new life broke, painting the cabin in strokes of gray and rose. Seraphina had not truly slept, but drifted in a state of hyper-aware exhaustion. When she finally opened her eyes, the chair in the corner was empty. A tray of food, fresh fruit, bread, and cheese sat on a small table beside the bed. It was a silent, impersonal offering. The wraith had come and gone without a sound. This, she would learn, was the rhythm of her new existence, a life defined by his presence and his absence, a constant, unnerving push and pull. The pattern established on their wedding night became a bizarre and unbreakable ritual. Every evening he would enter the cabin. Some nights he would speak, issuing a curt order or making a flat observation about the ship's progress. Most nights he was silent. He would work at his massive chart table for hours, his focus absolute, ignoring her as if she were another piece of furniture. And then when he was done, he would gesture to the bed, sleep, and the long vigil would begin. He would take a seat in the corner, a phantom in the shadows, and watch her until the first light of dawn. It was a form of psychological warfare more potent than any physical threat. The lack of violence, the utter absence of the brutality she had prepared for, left her unmoored. There was no enemy to fight, no monster to rail against. There was only this unnerving, constant observation. His gaze was not lecherous or cruel. It was something she couldn't define. It was heavy, weighted with a sorrow she couldn't comprehend. It felt as if he wasn't looking at her, but through her, at a ghost only he could see. Her fear began to curdle into a defiant curiosity. Who was this man? This king of killers who ruled with silence and sorrow? This husband who refused to be a husband? She decided that if she was to be a prisoner, she would not be a passive one. If he was studying her, she would study him back. She began to test the boundaries of her gilded cage. During the day, she had the freedom of the cabin. She started by rearranging the books on his shelves, moving them from his meticulous system into one of her own. He noticed. She knew he did. But he said nothing. He simply put them back in their original order the next day, without comment. She moved on to his charts, making a small, almost imperceptible correction to a coastline she knew from her own studies. The next day, she found a high-quality set of calligraphy pens and ink left on her side of the table. It was not praise, but it was an acknowledgement, a silent admission of her skill. Their war was fought in these small, silent gestures. She was determined to provoke a reaction, any reaction that would break through his icy control. She wanted to see the man behind the wraith. "Why do you do it?" she asked one night, her voice startling in the heavy silence. He didn't look up from the ledger he was reading. "Do what?" "Watch me," she pressed, her heart hammering. "Every night. You sit in that chair and you watch me. Why?" He closed the ledger, the sound unnaturally loud. He finally raised his eyes to meet hers, and the sheer emptiness in them chilled her to the bone. "A king must be vigilant," he said, his voice flat. "He must guard what is his." "I am not a treasure, Captain," she retorted, a spark of her old fire returning. "I am not a chest of gold you need to keep an eye on." "No," he agreed, and for the first time a flicker of something that might have been pain crossed his features. "Gold can be replaced." He stood and walked to the stern window, looking out at the dark water. "Go to sleep, Seraphina." The conversation was over, but he had used her name, and that small crack in his armor gave her a sliver of hope. She began to explore his world more deeply. The cabin was not just a room, it was a mausoleum of his past. Tucked away in a drawer, she found a small carved wooden bird, its wings worn smooth by countless touches. In another, a child's drawing of a ship with sails like clouds. These were things of softness, of life, things that did not belong in the world of the wraith. She found a book of ancient poetry, its pages filled with stories of tragic love. Tucked within its leaves was a single, perfectly preserved white rose, its petals as delicate as paper. The more she discovered, the more the puzzle of Captain Kaelen deepened. Who was the man who read poetry? Who was the father who kept a child's drawing? These were questions no one on the ship could answer. The crew treated him like a force of nature. They obeyed his silent commands without question. She approached his first mate, Alaric, a gnarled older man with a face like a sea chart and eyes that held a weary wisdom. "The captain," she began tentatively one afternoon on the deck. "He was not always like this?" Alaric stopped polishing a brass sextant and looked at her, his expression guarded. "Some storms change the coastline forever, my lady," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The captain, he weathered a storm that would have drowned any other man. It left him altered." "What storm?" she pressed. Alaric's eyes grew distant. "It is not my story to tell, my lady," he said, turning back to his work, but before she could walk away, he added, his voice barely a whisper, "Be careful. The sea is deep, and some ghosts are better left at the bottom." The warning only fueled her determination. She felt she was on the verge of a great discovery, a truth that would unlock the mystery of her strange husband. The truth, however, would find her first. It came in the form of a rival, a pirate captain named Grinner, a brutish man who did not believe in the legend of the Wraith. He saw the silent tide as a prize and Kaelin's protection of Solara as a weakness. His attack was sudden and savage, his ship appearing out of a fog bank, its cannons roaring. The chaos on the deck was absolute. Kaelen transformed. The silent, brooding man vanished, replaced by a whirlwind of deadly efficiency. He moved through the battle not with rage, but with a cold, geometric precision, his twin cutlasses a blur of silver. His crew, inspired by his presence, fought with a silent, terrifying discipline. Seraphina, trapped in the cabin, was thrown about by the impacts. A cannonball splintered the wall, sending a shower of wood and smoke into the room. A group of Grinner's men, seeing the captain's flag, decided to take the ultimate prize. They stormed the cabin, their eyes wild with greed. Seraphina fought back with the fury of a cornered animal, using a heavy book, then a letter opener, anything she could find. But there were too many. One of them grabbed her, his foul breath on her face. "The little queen will fetch a fine price," he snarled. And then Kaelen was there. He appeared in the doorway like an avenging spirit, his face a mask of such utter, murderous rage that it made the pirates recoil. But it wasn't a cold rage. This was hot. This was personal. He moved faster than she thought possible. It wasn't a fight. It was a slaughter. When he was done, he stood panting over the bodies of her attackers, his chest heaving. He turned to her. She was on the floor, her dress torn, a cut on her cheek. He took a step toward her, his hand outstretched, a look of raw panic and fear in his eyes. He was about to touch her face, to wipe away the blood, but as his fingers brushed against her skin, he flinched back as if he had been burned, a strangled cry escaping his lips. He stared at his own hand in horror, then looked at her, and the mask of the Wraith fell away completely. In its place was a man drowning in an ocean of agony. He turned and fled the cabin, leaving her alone amidst the carnage, more confused and terrified than ever before. The monster was not afraid of his enemies. He was afraid of her.
The aftermath of the battle was a silence deeper and more profound than any that had come before. The crew worked with grim efficiency to clear the decks and repair the damage, their movements quiet, their glances toward the captain's cabin filled with a new kind of fear. They had seen the Wraith's controlled fury 100 times, but the raw, protective rage he had unleashed to save Seraphina was something new. It was a crack in the god's armor, a hint of a humanity they thought long dead, and it unsettled them to their core. Inside the cabin, Seraphina sat for hours, her mind replaying the moment over and over. The look in his eyes, the way he had recoiled from her touch. It wasn't the action of a man who hated her. It was the action of a man who was terrified, not of her, but of what she represented. The puzzle pieces of her strange marriage began to click into place. The endless nightly vigils, the books of poetry, the child's drawing, Alaric's warning about ghosts. It was all connected to this profound, inexplicable fear of touching her. She would have answers, She would not allow herself to be a pawn in the game of a ghost she didn't understand. That evening, when he finally returned to the cabin, the sun having long set, she was not in the bed. She was waiting for him, standing in the center of the room, her arms crossed, her eyes blazing with a defiant resolve. He stopped in the doorway, his own eyes shadowed with exhaustion and a deep, weary pain. He looked at the empty bed, then at her. "Go to sleep, Seraphina," he said, his voice flat, attempting to reestablish their broken ritual. "No," she replied, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Not until you talk to me, not until you tell me why you look at me as if I'm a ghost, why you saved my life and then ran from me as if my touch was poison. I am your wife. I have kept my end of the bargain. I deserve a truth in return." He stared at her for a long moment, a silent battle raging within him. She could see the walls he had built around himself, the layers of ice and sorrow. She saw them begin to crack. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of a decade of grief, he finally broke. He didn't speak. He simply turned and walked toward the far wall of the cabin, a section that appeared to be nothing more than dark, polished wood. He pressed a hidden knot in the wood, and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a small, secret chamber she had never seen before. The air that drifted out was cool and smelled faintly of lavender and dust. He gestured for her to enter. Her heart pounded as she stepped across the threshold. The room was small, lit by a single, ever-burning lantern. It was not a treasure room. It was a shrine. On a small pedestal, covered in velvet, sat the small carved bird and the child's drawing she had found. But the centerpiece, hanging on the far wall, was a portrait, a stunningly beautiful oil painting of a woman with laughing eyes the color of a summer sky, and dark hair that fell in waves around her shoulders. A woman who, with a few small differences, could have been Seraphina's twin. "My first wife," Kaelen said, his voice so quiet it was almost carried away by the silence. "Lyra." The name hung in the air between them. Seraphina looked from the laughing woman in the portrait to the broken man beside her, and the full tragic scope of her situation became terrifyingly clear. She was not a queen. She was a replacement, a ghost haunting the life of a man already haunted by another. She was the sun, and I was the shadow that loved her. We met when we were young, before the sea claimed me. I built this empire for her. This ship, it was to be our home. He finally turned to look at Seraphina, and the pain in his eyes was a physical thing. She was murdered by the same man who attacked us today, Grinner. He wasn't just a rival. He wanted my territory, my reputation. He wanted to take everything from me. He and his men boarded the ship while I was away. They came for me, but found her instead. When I returned, she was still alive, just barely. He looked at the massive four-poster bed, his eyes filled with a horror that time had not dulled. She died in my arms, on our wedding bed, right there. Her blood ran cold. The bed she had slept in every night, the bed he watched over with such sorrow. It was not just a bed, it was a tomb. The trauma, it broke something inside me. The joy of touch became the memory of her dying. Intimacy became a ghost. I could command a fleet, I could conquer islands, but I couldn't bear the touch of another. He finally looked at her, his expression of raw, painful honesty. I agreed to your father's bargain to secure my territory, to fulfill a duty. I never expected you. You look so much like her. When I saw you that first day, it was like seeing a ghost, and I knew I was cursed.
The nightly vigils, they weren't an act of control. They were an act of penance. "I watch you sleep," he confessed, his voice breaking, "because I am terrified that if I close my eyes, you will vanish just as she did. I watch over you to ensure you are still breathing, because I could not bear to lose her again." The truth was so much more tragic than she could have ever imagined. He was not a monster. He was a man trapped in the worst moment of his life, reliving it every single night, and she was the unwilling star in his private tragedy. He hadn't just taken her as his wife, he had cast her in the role of his ghost. Now she had a choice, a terrible, profound choice. She could rage against him for using her as a stand-in for his dead love. She could hate him for the deception, for the coldness, for the bizarre prison he had built for them both. Or she could see the man, broken and drowning in his grief, and offer him a hand. The debt her father owed was for protection, but the debt she now felt was one of the heart. She walked toward him, her own fear and anger melting away, replaced by a wave of overwhelming compassion. He flinched as she drew near, expecting her to recoil in disgust, but she did not. She stopped just before him. She did not reach for him. Instead, she looked at the haunted bed and then back at him. "No one," she said, her voice soft but firm, "should be asked to sleep in a grave." She walked to the large divan near the stern windows, picked up a cushion and a blanket, and created a makeshift bed for herself. "Tonight," she said, "I will be the one to watch. You will sleep in a real bed, and you will know that you are not alone." She was breaking the ritual. She was refusing to be his ghost. She was offering to be his guardian instead. For the first time, she was not the price of the bargain. She was the one offering a new deal, a deal not of debt, but of healing. Kaelen stared at her, this impossible woman who looked like his greatest loss, but acted like his only hope. And for the first time in a decade, the Wraith felt the ice around his heart begin to thaw.
The night Seraphina chose to sleep on the divan, the very air in the cabin shifted. The silent, suffocating ritual that had defined their marriage was broken. Kaelen, for the first time, was not the watcher, he was the watched. He lay in the massive bed, alone, the space beside him feeling more vast and empty than ever before. He did not sleep. He lay awake, listening to the soft sound of her breathing from across the room, a sound that was both a comfort and a torment. He was a king who commanded a fleet, a man who could quell a mutiny with a single glance, yet he was rendered powerless by the compassion of this one woman. She had taken his grief, his sacred obsessive ritual, and refused to participate in it. She was not his ghost. She was real, and her reality was forcing him to confront his own. This new dynamic set the course for the weeks that followed. Seraphina never returned to the captain's bed. She made the divan her own space, a quiet act of rebellion that reshaped their shared world. Their interactions began to change. The silent meals became tentative conversations. She would ask him about the stars, using the charts in his cabin as a guide. He, in turn, found himself explaining the principles of celestial navigation, his voice losing some of its rusty disuse. He learned she had a quick, strategic mind, often seeing patterns in the maps that he had overlooked. She learned that beneath his cold exterior was a man of deep intellect and a bone-deep weariness. She did not try to seduce him. She did not try to replace the memory of Lyra. Instead, she offered him something he hadn't realized he'd lost: friendship. She became his confidant, his partner in strategy. She helped him manage the trade routes for Solara, ensuring her people prospered under his protection. She became a presence on the ship, no longer the captain's mysterious bride, but a sharp, respected figure in her own right.
The crew, led by Alaric's quiet approval, began to call her their queen, not out of fear, but out of a grudging admiration. Kaelen found himself changing. The nightmares began to fade. He no longer felt the constant gut-wrenching dread that Seraphina would disappear if he looked away. Her presence was a steady, warm anchor in the storm of his past. He began to look at her, not the ghost she resembled. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw, the quiet strength that had allowed her to survive in his world. And he realized, with a terror that was swiftly replaced by a profound sense of wonder, that he was falling in love with her, not as a replacement for Lyra, but as Seraphina. This impossible, infuriating, incredible woman who had refused to be his ghost and had instead chosen to save his soul. But ghosts, once disturbed, do not rest easily. The rival pirate, Grinner, had not been defeated, only repelled. He had tasted the Wraith's blood and seen his weakness. He had seen the way Kaelen fought for Seraphina, and he knew that to destroy the king, he only needed to remove the queen. This time, he did not come for a battle. He came for an assassination. The attack came not at sea, but at Solara. Grinner's men infiltrated the island, a small, elite team with a single goal: capture Seraphina while Kaelen's ship was resupplying. The final confrontation would not be on the deck of a ship, but in the halls of her own home. The battle was a desperate, close-quarters affair. Seraphina, using her knowledge of the mansion's secret passages, fought alongside Alaric and Kaelen's honor guard. She was no damsel in distress. She was a queen defending her kingdom. The climax arrived when Grinner finally cornered her in the grand ballroom. But just as he lunged, Kaelen appeared, his face a mask of cold, controlled death. The final duel was not a battle of equals. It was an execution. Kaelen fought with a clarity and purpose he hadn't possessed in years. He was not fighting for the memory of a ghost. He was fighting for the reality of the woman standing behind him. He disarmed Grinner, the man's sword clattering on the marble floor. "She died because of you," Kaelen said, his voice low and devoid of all emotion but a final, chilling finality. "But this one lives." And he ended the man who had haunted his past. In the quiet aftermath, surrounded by the wreckage, Kaelen turned to Seraphina. He was wounded, bleeding from a cut on his arm. Without a word, she tore a strip from her own dress and began to bind the wound. Her touch was gentle, steady, and this time he did not pull away. He stood perfectly still, looking down at her, at this woman who had faced down his demons with him. "The debt is paid, Kaelen," she whispered, looking up at him. "My people are safe. The contract is fulfilled. You can take me back to my father." He looked at her, and his heart, a fortress of ice for a decade, finally, completely melted. "Your father's debt was paid the day I took you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But the debt I owe you, I could spend a lifetime repaying it." He gently took her hand, the one not tending his wound, and raised it to his lips. It was the first voluntary touch, the first true intimacy that had ever passed between them. "I do not want to take you back to your father, Seraphina. I want to take you home." She looked into his eyes and saw her own future reflected there. A future not on a quiet island, but on the vast open sea beside this man who had journeyed back from the land of the dead for her. "I am home," she replied. That night, back in the cabin of the Silent Tide, she walked to the massive four-poster bed. She turned back the silk sheets and looked at him, a silent invitation. The ghost of Lyra was finally at peace. The tomb had become a sanctuary again. He came to her, and for the first time, he did not sit in the chair. He lay down beside her, and as he finally truly took his wife in his arms, the Wraith was gone, and only Kaelen remained. He had spent so many nights watching her sleep to pay a debt to the past. Now he would spend the rest of his life awake by her side, paying a debt of love. The stories people tell of the Pirate King all have one thing in common. They speak of his ruthlessness, but they often miss the heart of the tale. True strength, like true love, is often found not in the battles we win, but in the ghosts we choose to face. And if you believe there are more stories of the heart waiting to be discovered in the most unlikely of places, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you can join us on our next voyage into the depths of adventure and romance.